When we first were talking about doing this panel, a topic that's near and dear to my heart is national level certs. That's where I most recently had come from before Tanium. And over that time that I was there for about 7 years, building out capabilities, adding new capabilities, really evolving what we did, it's got me started thinking, well, what's the current state of the world with other certs? Where have we gone? And hopefully we'll get into some discussion about where we should go. With that, I'm going to let you guys introduce yourselves, how you want everyone to hear a description of where you are currently, and then we'll get into the questions. So Luke?
Well, thanks. That was unscripted.
Yes, it was.
Yes, awesome.
Got to keep you on your toes.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks. So I'm Luc, Luc Baudouin, and I'm currently DM secure. So anybody has been in military, before here, DM secure, the infamous compliance people. So that's me now, and for the last 2 months, just started. Before that, I have a similar background as the people I'm supposed to disagree with here. So I was a chief of ops at CSER a couple of years ago. I managed the IPC at Bell Canada for a while. I managed the IPC at CSC for a while. So that's my background.
Awesome. And Patrick?
Good afternoon. I have to admit, it's really nice to see so many people in the room stay on their own terms. It has nothing to do with an iPad draw at the end of the day. So kudos to you for staying. Thank you. My name is Patrick Lowe. I'm with the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity. I'm relatively new to the organization. My role there is to manage the incident management practice within the centre. And previous to the centre, I was with CSERC for roughly 6 years, where CSERC is the national cert, was a national cert prior to the centre. And before that, I ran an IPC in a government department. I've been with the government for about 18 years. How time flies. Like Chris, the CERT spirit, the principles of a CERT are near and dear to my heart. Working in a CERT has probably been the most rewarding period of my career, and hopefully I can provide some insight today that will be useful to you.
Great. And Sasha?
Hi, I'm Sasha. I'm officially their pain in their asses.
Confirmed.
Yeah. For those of you who saw my presentation, I'm a threat analyst by trade, but I'm also a strategic advisor in the area of incident management. Clearly, one can't do national level incident management without a highly functional CERT, so I've also had the benefit of being an advisor both for standing up CCIRC as well as other national certs. I have participated in the standing up of internal SOCs and organizations going on 20 some odd years prior to me going, I want to get back hands to keyboard. But I continue to do advice and guidance in that area, which is to say when I see stuff going sideways, I am a pain in the ass to people and kick them and go, can we please solve this problem? And can we please get industry involved, because we have some great folks on that side of it as well.
Also confirmed.
With that much tact or less?
I have to buy beer afterwards generally.
Okay, fair enough.
For that. So,
all right, let's get into the questions. Let's get to the fun stuff. I'm actually going to start with Patrick for this one. Let's do this. So looking back maybe 10, maybe as few as 5 years ago, what was the functions of a typical CERT, or what you could reasonably expect from a national level CERT?
So 5 years. Where was I 5 years ago? I would say that just looking back at the history of certs, they kind of came about in the 90s, early 90s, late 80s, and they were primarily a community of experts, and they were engineered and built based on a series of activities, Morris worm, early days of cyber, the glory days of cyber. as far as I'm concerned. And things kind of evolved from there. And we really didn't see a shift away from that core community of practice until probably the mid-2000s, I would say, in the advent of a shift in how cyber was being employed for different motives, one of them being financial, the other being a more strategic in nature. The early days of the Certs, for me, in my experience, was largely a coordination role, making sure that when folks needed help, they had a national entity, a national point of contact to be able to get the help that they needed in terms of connecting with the right organizations, whether that be law enforcement, whether that be international community. So again, a large coordination function from a national CERT perspective was something that we did quite a bit of. And some of the fundamentals were there as well, releasing advisories about critical vulnerabilities, making sure that whatever information we had to share from a national perspective, we shared that information so that others could benefit from the experiences of victims or others in our constituency. And again, it stayed that way until probably the last 5 or 6 years, and we're seeing a dynamic where national centers are being built, Canada being one example, but we're not the first. And that's kind of the timeline as I look back at my career in the CERT community in terms of where things have gone.
Okay. Sasha, from your perspective, 5-10 years ago, looking at a national CERT, what could you expect out of them in terms of functions and services?
I think most of them perform.
What did you tell me to do at the time?
Be a trusted broker. I'll be honest, we can talk about all sorts of fancy functions that they're going to do. But a national CERT provides exactly one function. They provide trust. I might not be able to trust every one of you in the room, but I trust them. I'll give them my data. I'll allow them to anonymize it, find out the really key parts of it. They are my trusted authority as the national CERT in each of their roles. They then would build trust with each one of you. I don't have time to do that. As an industry representative, I don't. So they were, for me, a trusted authority and a trusted broker. My fear is that as we evolve, people forget that they are literally the trust brokers. That's where I saw them 5 years ago, and I will have you know that Canada was held up as a model for being one of the best national CERTs in terms of a model. So I applaud these two. Most people don't realize what hard work they put into building that, and I'm not sucking up. I don't owe them beer right now.
Luke?
Yeah, I know that.
I just like watching the blushing.
Thanks. So yeah, like Sasha helped a lot with connecting the dots there for sure. But yeah, so historically certs were, in US certs, you know about that. So posting advisories, right? That's what the cert was for. And then people are like, this is useless. Just go straight to the Cisco page. That's where all the vulnerability are. Go to the Microsoft page. That's where the updates are. So why do we need a cert for that? Well, the thing that dawned on me is that you actually need a trusted place to put it up to tell you so that you can use it as, hey, the government is saying that this is important, and it helps people convince their executive that they should do something about it. So that was a value that was unexpected at the beginning. So advisories and saying this is a big thing posted on a government cert page or a national cert properly recognized for that matter is serves that purpose. It's the trusted place that you can point to blame that you need resources to fix it, as opposed to the 2,000 other things that you also need to fix. So that was one thing. Then the other thing that came up more in the last 8 years was the notification. So you need a place where you can, when you find a dump of data of compromised stuff, that you can throw it over the fence and they're going to handle it. And they're going to notify the 15,000 victims that your data repo key logging files you ended up finding on a Zeus CNC server somewhere that they're going to be handled properly. So notification at scale is a service that the national CERT, that the best national CERTs do and should have done in the last 5 years if they didn't. So I think we had that. It's not perfect, but those two things is what I saw national CERT doing, and I think it's still right today.
Yep. I think that's a core function that necessarily has to continue to exist. But over time, we see and recognize other needs that come into play. For U.S. Cert, it was a little bit by accident. So U.S. Cert, many don't recognize this. U.S. Cert stands for the United States Computer Emergency Readiness Team. The R actually doesn't stand for response. It was all about the function of preparing people and arming them with what they needed in that eventuality of an incident. Fairly early on in my time at U.S. Cert, we actually had an incident. I was a bad government employee. I answered my phone at late hours. I was actually in the office on a Thursday night at about 6 o'clock, and I answered my phone. It happened to be the FBI calling me and saying they were sending a team to New York, and some other intelligence organizations were sending a team to New York. And I said, well, you guys don't send teams anywhere, especially domestically. What's going on? And it was we can't tell you. You just need to show up in New York, and we'll brief everyone in person in the morning. And that was the first time that U.S. Cert actually ended up doing incident response, was around that event that occurred. And I spent about 6 weeks in New York City, straddling December into January of 2010 into 2011. And that's how U.S. Cert actually started doing incident response, was over that whole of government multi-agency response out of a major incident. And we quickly realized that we were going to be doing this more often. Success breeds more work. Not necessarily more success, but at least more work. And that's how we built out the program. We started from that one event. About 4 weeks after we put that incident to bed, the RSA intrusion happened in 2011. So what we had already quickly learned about multi-agency response for the first thing was put into play for the second, and it snowballed from there. So incident response became a cornerstone thing that we added to the things that we did as U.S. Cert. Plenty of other services and things that we've done since then. Indicator sharing and facilitating direct sharing of indicators between organizations has played a part. What other things have you guys seen that have been added as services for your certs and organizations?
Can I jump in?
Go for it.
We'll stop you.
So the one function that I love that our national cert, see, this is why we have Pat in the middle. The one service that I love that our national cert has provided, how many of you have to deal with an incident in your organization? Fair amount, hands, yeah? Lots of you? Now, how many of you want to guess you probably have been dealing with the exact same incident? The function that a national cert should provide is national mitigation. It is so much easier for us resource-wise to have a coordinated effort against that particular attack than it is for 40 different organizations to do 40 different people on it. We don't have the time and the resources to do that. And when you can have a mitigation against a DDoS, a malware outbreak, a spam run, that's coordinated by the national cert, that leverages trusted communities like telcos and banks and other organizations, law enforcement, that can then try and respond to their 1% of the problem and put that all together, we can attack the problem much more effectively than if we each try and tackle it individually. And having them be the coordination function for that, you have no idea how many threats have been mitigated because of that function. And I think more than anything, we need to continue to grow that.
We'll take a question on that. Let's keep the conversation go up here. Well, if you can jot that down, though. Luke, anything?
No, but that's true, and that's kind of the piggybacking on what you said. Is so one service that has definitely stepped up lately in national certs has been those law enforcement cases, as those national big national mitigations, and we've had. I know that from a Canadian perspective, I think I was amongst I saw the beginning of that, and Pat continued that after. But we did some good operations there with our CMP, with national security. That is transparent to many. But we scaled using the community and the trust that had been built. So that's a wicked service that any national cert needs to be able to do, and it's within the lanes of everybody. And there's no money involved. That's a funny thing about these big mitigation at national level. So making IP addresses that are evil disappear, or putting pressure on an AS to drop routes, or sinkholing domains, those kind of things. There's typically, it's only trust. It's only please do it, and the person will do it off their work hour and
Volunteer firefighters.
yeah, volunteer firefighters, exactly. And but we've had tremendous success. The problem with this is scaling it, and right now the economics is not great on that. But National Cert has a place and a role to play on changing these economics.
Pat, I noticed you were jotting down some notes, so I think you have some things you want to add.
I'm just doodling.
No?
No, I actually, just to expand on what Luke said, and a separate point after that. When Luke says community, that doesn't, you've got a couple of government folks here, but that doesn't necessarily mean government only. These collaborations on a given threat or a given issue are largely non-government communities, and the importance of having someone from the telcos, someone from the banks, someone from the AV or cybersecurity community, someone from government, someone from law enforcement involved in some of these activities is the key to its success. So I just want to emphasize the importance of the community, but also noting that government cannot do this by ourselves, and that's I guess my point on that one. Just along lines of some of your experiences, Chris, I had a similar experience that was a bit of a changing moment for me, at least, and led to some of the kind of the bigger picture issues that we're starting to tackle today. In July 2014, I was sitting by the swimming pool having some cold drinks. Like you, I like answering the phone on the weekends. And it was a large defense aerospace company in the US. And they had one of their supply chain companies, a Canadian company in this case, a company of 25 people, that had basically experienced a cybersecurity breach. The actor in this case was fairly sophisticated. Company of 25 people building widgets for some airplane somewhere is a relatively small enterprise. And the company themselves didn't know what to do. They didn't have the capacity to be able to respond to the issue. They didn't have the money to be able to afford a $250,000 IR contract. And we did our best in that case and ended up getting them the help they needed. But this really raised an economic gap in the way that we do cyber and protect our enterprises in Canada and probably globally. That coupled with this idea that a company of 25 people is expected to prevent some of these issues from occurring to them or happening to them, I think is probably not a very fruitful exercise. And we really need to rethink the way we tackle this issue and have far more national level approaches to these types of issues. Sending them indicators all day long just doesn't work.
No.
It doesn't work, and we're appealing to large enterprises, but we need to think more broadly about our strategies.
Yeah,
And the worst part is there, if I don't, just jumping in for 1 second, is that most of the bad actors know this. So they're targeting the universities, they're targeting the small enterprises, they're targeting this to get into the bigger fish, knowing that there's a trusted connection going there, and that's where that's an invaluable service that National Certs can provide, is that overload.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny, in a separate conversation, we go into cyber risk and cyber insurance. A lot of larger organizations, in terms of managing their supply chain risk, are requiring indemnification from these small companies if the larger company has a breach. It's not realistic either. And I've seen some large companies demand that, okay, in the very least, you have to carry multi-million-dollar cyber insurance policies. That may not be viable either, based on the income that company has. But at least they need to have a skin in the game. But on the other side of that, we need to provide better guidance to these smaller organizations to help them either secure it themselves or find the resources to do that security for them.
while you catch your breath, there's supply chain is, D&D is not at all exposed to supply chain problems. We would never be a target. It starts, some of the smaller company, the ecosystem out there starts with in French we say les donneurs d'ordre. So in the big economic players, they need to start, rolling in cybersecurity requirements as part of their contracts. And hopefully that percolates down and gets enforced through audit appropriately. So I really believe this. So if I buy planes from, a plane company that outsources their landing gear to a Canadian company in Quebec, Montreal, would that be? Then they hopefully my contract with them will percolate all the way down, and they will be forced to pay or to incentivize the smaller guy to reach out to bring up their security to be able to comply with the contract requirements. So there's a bit of that in there as well, and educate the people to do it.
Yeah, Pat, I don't know if back in the day, if I ever got a chance to tell you one of the debates that we ended up having in government is the role of government in providing IR services. I mean, there's stuff in the private sector. It's not usually cheap, and for small organizations, it's particularly problematic. We ended up having to come up with kind of rules of engagement. When does government jump in? So a couple of factors came into play for us. Is it private sector critical infrastructure? If the answer is yes, then probably government has a role to play there in that thing. Is it a small organization that just financially doesn't have the wherewithal to get those resources? Is it a case where if government is involved, government has unique knowledge through their reach back into the intelligence and law enforcement community about that threat so that they can help support? Or is it a case where government may hope to learn something from this victim that they can then use to help that broader community? Back to Sasha's point earlier on about, when a national level cert sees a problem in one organization, they hopefully are recognizing that that is applicable to many more and communicating out appropriately to others in the community so they can then defend themselves about that new threat. But yeah, we actually ended up having to come up with a gating criteria. When did we engage in a space that arguably could be taken from private sector resources?
Yes.
Yeah, it's.
I have a huge discomfort with doing IR from a government perspective. There's very smart companies that do IR right now. So the role of government in there shouldn't be to do IR, should be to maybe validate the IR qualification and the trust of some of the IR offering out there. You don't want to have the fake AV providing IR.
Yes, but define what you mean by IR versus incident handling, because there is a distinct
exactly.
difference.
So coordination is a
Yeah.
Exactly. So coordination, definitely a government anchor of trust kind of thing, but doing on-site IR, and the economics of it is the hard thing to address.
Because I don't want to see the government put the hands on the keyboard of a small agency and look at their firewall rules. On the other hand, telling them, here's a checklist that you need to get your staff to run through, and you might want to look for point A, point B, and point C. There are a lot of small organizations that need that, because even companies like myself, where you can do like sock in a box, okay? That's still out of the reach of many of these small organizations. So yes, okay, we don't want government to say, okay, this is how you configure it, and this is how you go and look at your log. But go look in your log for X, Y, and Z and call me back and I'll tell you and I'll give you some help. We might disagree on that, but I do feel that that is a critical function of the National Cert.
Yeah, I think providing the guidance of these are the things you should do is a bare minimum. But I do, from my own experience, did encounter organizations that arguably were pretty sizable that should have had that type of resource. In fact, by title, they did have that resource inside their company or agency in some cases. But the reality was very different from that in terms of their capability in executing. But always, it was very important for us that we operated by vampire rules. You had to be invited in. They had to ask for that help in that moment and set the rules of what they wanted out of that. But every time, I think they're always, and this is the healthy part, government should be asking, is this an engagement that they should be involved in? And is there a better resource out in the private sector for that? But there are core things consistently, that coordination role that certs have to provide in all cases. And I think this is going to vary between countries and culture around that. And where that pushback is of, suddenly you have government agents on your network in some ways.
Chris, I'll just add,
Yeah.
I mean, when it comes to IR, there are many different strategies around it. The UK has got a list of pre-qualified IR companies to avoid the kind of things that Sasha was pointing to, or Luke was saying about fake AV doing IR. And we've seen cases where we've dealt with companies that have had significant compromises, and we help them review kind of the RFPs that are being pitched to them to come on site to be able to help them out, and the RFPs for a vulnerability assessment. So anyway, the strategy in the UK is an interesting one. It still doesn't resolve the economics issue, and I think my view, the views expressed are those of my own. There are going to be cases based on a rigid set of criteria where it makes sense for at least some form of physical support to the organization, or in combination with a response company in some way, to be able to help somebody through the process of dealing with a major compromise of their network.
Yeah, so it boils down to your rules of engagement. Again,
Yeah.
there's a place, there's a balance, and
Yeah.
there's some risks.
The number of times that we went on site and a big named IR company was already there, and we end up working side by side them. The focus is a little bit different. It is definitely more the crisis management side of it, and the IR company is working on some more of the deep technical analysis in some cases. But it's not uncommon when government does plug in and is asked in that there already is a resource there, just a little bit of a different focus in what's being brought to the table. Are there any other functions or services that are new that have seemingly sprung up in the last 5 years that
I have
you've
one, but
seen?
these, my colleagues here are going to disagree with me. So the role that I would like to see some more national certs playing, and the only one that I see thus far is in the UK, is public policy. This is going to be politically incorrect. We are breeding our own next generation of hackers. We don't teach children how to use the internet properly, and I mean ethically, not necessarily safely, until they're in grade 8 or 9. My son taught me how to hack a Wi-Fi point at 6. He found his first 0-day at 8. We teach them to go online and play games. They watch YouTube videos. Please tell me there's no parent in this room that child has not gone and watched a gaming video, okay? These gaming videos teach them how to play their game video fantastically. It also teaches them how to get more game credit. Where do you think that game credit is coming from? That is the underground economy. These children then watch the gaming credit video, which then leads them into, hey, let's play with these other guys because they're the elite crew on it. I want to get on their crew. Now you have one crew playing against another crew, and they get pissed off with one another, so they start doxing one another. And they want to have that server, so they found this new YouTube video that says, hey, this is how I can get the server to myself. That's actually called a DDoS. And then in grade 8, they get to have their, this is how we get online. We teach them how to get on a school bus safely at like 4. And yet we don't teach them how to get into the dangerous parts of the internet until they're too old to be able to convince. We are literally giving them the pathways to become cyber criminals, and they don't even know they're doing it. I would love to see national certs start getting into public policy about how can we create programs working with banks so that it's right at the ATM. Do you know where your child is online today? And you'd think I would know the better than anybody else. Do you know how many times I found my son literally in the middle of accidentally doing something insane, like I'm going to go on Pastebin and find random code to throw on my server? And he literally grew up with these two as uncles, okay?
He grew up with you.
Problem one.
Yeah. I'll chime in on that one. So I got a text message, Uncle Chris, hey, how do I get a VPN for my gaming? Like, really? Why do you want that? Tell me more. And then you start to find out that maybe he ticked off someone and got booted from a game and needs a new IP address. Okay, tell me more. We're going to talk about this. Who gave you the idea of going in a VPN? Really, tell me their names. I want to have a chat with them. Yeah, we're fooling ourselves if we don't think and recognize that they're going to discover things and learn things, and if we're not doing it a little more proactively ahead of time, yeah, they're going to go down some interesting paths.
And they're watching folks like Lulsec and Poison Crew talk with one another in the gaming servers. I had a conversation with the head of a national cert at one point, trying to figure out why this gaming crew was implanting things and going, like, why, if it's not actually this person, why is it this person? He finally got so pissed off because this was all on audio, like on speakerphone, and he came going, oh, you guys are so old, you're pissing me off, here's the URL, and threw at me literally a gaming forum where the guys were arguing with each other, and they were having a hack-off to see which crew was a better hacker crew. This is a well-known hacker crew. This is what our kids are sitting inside of, because we say, oh yeah, gaming is fun, go play the video game. Mom wants to have a break. Dad wants to have a break. Go play some online video games.
So while Sasha's going to take a glass of water.
My personal pet peeve is how these
No.
teen hackers.
Yeah, but that's it. Like, yeah, those that have kids know about that. Like, mine did hired a bot to give him likes on a picture on Instagram because they had a competition of who had the most likes. So, brave new world. But the question is, so nobody will disagree. Nobody will disagree on education. So cyber education is so right now, the typical number of 1 million short in cybersecurity professional right now, so lots of jobs opening and whatnot, and we have lots of people here that have for sure job security forever as a result of this. So yeah, we absolutely need that. The question is the CERT the right place to be the lobbyist for cybersecurity education from young age all the way to professional grade? And the answer is probably yes. It's probably yes, because we have CERTs. Including enterprise certs, have the most data to back up their arguments about the need. So yeah, absolutely with you on that. And the cert has a role, if not to write the policy, to advocate for it, and to push the policymakers and the lawmakers to put them forward.
Okay.
A smart person once told me that metrics are the way to go to prove these things, and certs are the only ones that have those.
Yeah, and metrics lead to money.
That they do. All right, so we do also have a lot of CERT organizations that have never changed their model, that are, still doing exactly what they did 10, 15 years ago, or whenever they were stood up, and not added any of these other services, or not pivoted, and some of them it may be a conscious decision. Is there anything that you guys see as a common trend there for those organizations? Is it politics, lack of remit to allow them to do it, or funding that keeps them from shifting or pivoting? Or is it just maybe because of where they are in the world, there's no push for them to adjust to a different world?
Or they realize why change a good thing?
I'll just jump in then for a sec. So I know change. Like at CSERC, for example, there were in 2010 when I arrived there was 7 people, and I think CSERC was like 60 people at the creation of the center. So there's been a bit of a growth, and I know that the way we help contribute to some bigger picture there, but the way I contributed to it is to get data, again, back to the metric, to demonstrate and then get funding and then transform. But the way I got this data was with the trusted communities that Sasha introduced me to. So once I got the data, then I could make an argument that these are the victims in Canada and we need more investment, and let's grow a program around it. So I'd say that certs that do not evolve are because they're secluded and they refuse to, or they fail to realize the importance of cybersecurity communities. If you go to these various trust groups, then you know that you cannot stay steady. It's not a matter of funding; it's a matter of partnerships, and it's actually cheap to do stuff in community. And there's amazing things that can be done. So I'd say that. So if they don't evolve because they're not exposed to all the great things they could do for cheap.
Okay. All right, one last one, real quick. So where should certs be looking to extend themselves and add to what they're offering in the future, maybe 5 years out from now? What should they be looking towards for new demands on their resources?
I think Pat should take this one.
Just because I'm writing down some notes.
You can scribble a little bit more. I'll take one stab at it.
Tell your son we're hiring, by the way.
So it's a question of scale. It's a question of moving on where the most strategic place of influence is, and right now that strategic place is the cloud. So it's about intervening at the and building those trust relationships with some of the service providers out there. So the telco, the banks, and things like that. Those are standard relationships any national cert need to have. But increasingly, it's going to be this other tier of service that is being added that really brings the corporate enterprise world into that mid layer and the cloud and all these service as
Figuring out how to plug into and gain some insight and visibility in that world that's traditionally been in the
infrastructure
enterprise.
that is getting added there that we all depend on. So we'll have to have those relationships there.
Pat?
Yeah, so scalability was exactly the point I was going to make. We're seeing a huge, and have been for the last couple of years, a huge transfer and shift of e-commerce and IT to non-business owners, relying on the cloud, relying on very large organizations to provision services to enable small to medium enterprise and large enterprise, quite frankly. The advantage we have as Certs to have a fulsome and deep relationship with these large tier providers is it becomes a lot more scalable. Dealing with several thousand small to medium enterprises is not scalable. It's not practical, and it's quite frankly a disservice to the stakeholders of the Cert. So I think. Again, we need to think about how things are moving from an economics and business perspective and make sure that we're being really smart about the organizations that we're engaging with and the level and spectrum of services that are being developed and offered to our external stakeholders should be such that we have an eye on kind of what our stakeholder community looks like today and what it will look like tomorrow.
And the economics of it again, right? Can we build models for SOCs that are looking at the same problem from multiple different organizations? Maybe it's not at the national cert level, maybe it's at the vendor level, right?
So I'm going to put words in your mouth, Sasha, from earlier, one of your comments. Could I sum it up as whatever certs do in terms of change, don't do it for change's sake, but really think through why, and don't lose sight of the core functions?
So we've talked about some that say static, and apparently I differ on Luke on this. I've seen some national certs that were stood up perfectly, and they have not changed one iota in 15 years because their core service fed to their national requirements. They didn't need to change. They realized changing would actually break the good stuff that they've built. I've seen other organizations that have changed and evolved because maybe necessarily they started off very small and they need to grow. You just have to be very conscious about what you are changing for. We're at an era where most of the national certs have been around for a while, and anybody who's followed security for a while, we have this wonderful tendency every 4 or 5 years to break all the good stuff they did because we need to fix it and we need to upgrade. And I've seen us step backwards, and I've seen other countries step backwards because people get the bright idea that we have to rejuvenate without actually looking at are we going to break it worse by doing that? So I'm not saying we shouldn't change. I'm just saying I've seen it happen too many times. I can see some of my old bosses here where I talk about CARS ITS, and you have to have been around in the community for a very long time. You have to know DARI to know we've come a lot of different times. We've come right up to a really good thing and then went, oh, somebody's thought we have to rejuvenate it all, and we start all over again, and we step back 2 years. And the bad guys take advantage of that, and it just kills me. Like, we got to work together, because they all do.
Excellent. All right, let's turn it to the audience, take some questions. We got a few minutes.
Just hold on, we'll come see you with a mic.
Merci. My question will be for the whole panel. I will ask it in French just to make sure that the essence go well, and Patrick and Luc, you can translate for the audience. Je veux juste être sûr d'avoir bien compris, ce serait quoi la fonction d'un national cert versus une entreprise privée qui aurait le même genre d'organisme?
Ah, ben oui. so the question is, what is the difference between a national cert and an enterprise cert, right? And what are the different functions? Well, enterprise cert is you have total visibility, control, and ownership. You're the master. To take a Seinfeld job, you're the master of your domain. That was a good joke. Anyway. But obviously, the national cert suffers from that visibility because obviously, and then it wouldn't scale otherwise. So you have to think smartly about how you do. It's very much a coordination there, and relies on enterprise certs to share some information and tidbits, and to make that nugget that is being shared from an enterprise cert perspective a very high value contribution to the rest of the community. So I'd say, this is it. This is the big difference. And a national cert's dream is to be an enterprise cert. Like a national cert is basically a baby enterprise cert that really want to be an enterprise cert at the national level. It's not a place that we should let a national cert either be. Very important to draw the line, because your authority from a privacy perspective to look at your data, decrypt SSL, go into every computer for the purpose of defending your network, that you can. National cert obviously cannot. So we have to have there's a line, and that's the main thing.
And it's one constituent rather than multiple constituents. So the problem, there's some negatives to an enterprise cert, having stood up many of them. You sometimes have a visibility if your IT department and your security department play nice well together. And the fact of the matter is, your view is your only view. You don't see what else is happening. In most attacks, you need to see holistically across the globe what's going on. So there's a huge difference between that. I've stood in a enterprise cert personally as a lead IR person, and then I have to always reach outside of the organization to go, help me understand this. What is the bigger picture here? So there's drawbacks to it as well.
Anything else you want to add to that?
Just really quickly, I mean, Luke touched on this, like what drives the business are very different things. For an enterprise cert, it's largely the economics and the well-being of the business. And for a national cert, it's a national perspective. What's the right thing to do for Canada? And that's actually been really rewarding. We assist law enforcement by taking data blobs and notifying victims and helping them recover through that process while the police chase bad guys. It's
freeing,
just the
too.
drivers are really, really different from the national cert perspective. And when I joined CSIRC in 2012, I was not expecting that, actually. It was refreshing in many ways and scary, because when you're used to having data in front of you and IDS systems and firewalls and logs and all that stuff, operating at a layer of abstraction that is basically none of that, and a heavy reliance upon voluntary incident reporting into the CERT, absent other data sources that Luke touched on earlier, it's a pretty scary proposition. But it's an intellectual challenge that's been really, really interesting for my career.
And
Yeah,
it must
and
be
it-
pretty frustrating for you too. Like, as we're talking about it, when I was on the enterprise side, and these two gentlemen were on the national side, I go, oh, well, why haven't you shut it down? I just went in the thing and I went, bing, incident done. You guys would have to sit there and watch it and be so frustrated, I would bet, not being able to sometimes do anything about a problem that you could see.
No, that's it. And nor should we sometimes, because you break stuff. I'm sure you broke a few things in your enterprise. So you would definitely... So you definitely don't know on the national level to break stuff, and then you wouldn't know. But yeah, anyways. But the point is that national and enterprise depend heavily on each other. Very good synergy there. So tell me what you see on that indicator. Test that. So we would do that. Test that idea signature that we got from a partner. Lots of false positive. Okay, maybe it's not so good. No, Luke, it's great. It's brilliant. Awesome. Let's distribute this. Right. So.
Yeah, that trust and relationships over time. That's the big thing you learn when you jump into a national level cert, is just building those relationships over time. And I think that's also a key thing that's important, is the retention of people in the national level certs over time, because building those relationships It is people, even if it's organization, whether we like it or not, whether our senior leaders like it or not, it is the people underneath that glue all that together. And if we don't retain the right people for long periods of time, you lose a lot of momentum with that. Let's jump to another question.
Yeah, we have a former colleague that would like to ask a question.
I wasn't going to give that full disclosure, but I used to be in CSIRC.
You're forgiven.
You've spoken about the importance of trust relationships and communities of interest, and there are limitations on how far you can take that for all the reasons you guys have talked about, and also the problem of scalability. One area you haven't talked about is the critical infrastructure. So there's no economic incentive for anybody except government to look at critical infrastructure and make sure critical infrastructure is maintained for the common good. How do you see national certs playing a role in that, or is that legislation, or how do you see that being addressed?
I'm a D&D guy, so I'll refer.
That was a very elegant
I just heard
tap
he wasn't
dance.
critical. So I would argue that as we look back through the evolution of our CERT in Canada, I would say that the CERT has played a fairly active role with critical infrastructure in Canada. Whatever critical infrastructure means, I mean, there are some fairly broad definitions of what CI is. But they're equally as important to us as the government of Canada's network. If the grid goes down in Ontario, then that's probably going to be of interest to us, particularly if there's a cyber component to it. So I think critical infrastructure is absolutely at the core of what we're trying to achieve within the centre, and has been at the core of the national CERT, at least, to institute those relationships, to offer programs and services to that community to the best we could, yeah, I'm not sure if Sasha has anything more on that.
Yeah, I was going to say, the CONOP for CCRC, the National CERT, when it was stood up, specifically stated that critical infrastructure was their constituency. So it's codified for your support of them.
I'll jump in. So critical infrastructure in Canada, that's mostly, I think mostly publicly owned, provincial, some federal. The big ones like the bank and the telcos, that's private. But really, it's like chartered, like, it's even chartered in the federal law, somehow, and CRTC is in there. So I guess the point is that for the public side, municipalities, water, stuff like that, they are not subjected to any compliance regime. None. So at Bell, I had like PCI, I had SOX on my back all the time. There was so at least there was some kind of incentive that if you don't invest in your current, PCI infrastructure to do some pen testing, at some point you're going to be fined millions of dollars. We don't have that for water or electricity, things that we rely on. So that's a place. That's a place we need some kind of a third-party audit regime to make sure that, and penalties, and but on public it's kind of hard to have those penalties, but we somehow will have to have a law that will force some people to invest. Because what we see is that it's a cost. Security is a cost. We don't see investment in it. Still today, despite how many years we've been talking about it, and despite having all these stories week after week after week of people getting compromised.
I think once liability starts getting attached to it, I mean real liability, especially when organizations are going to be liable for attacks that are bounced off of them, we're going to see maybe a slight shift in that. Just saying. There's regulations that are coming into place, at least in the U.S., that are saying if an attack bounces off your network, you can be liable for that.
Oh yeah, but GDPR and all that kind of jazz.
Oh,
right?
exactly.
It's,
So I think
it's carrying company, but what's the equivalent for the public service? So that's the to me that's the big issue, right? So the government needs to be part of that, and the municipalities, provincial, and like the health system is so you have in the U.S., right? You have the legal the FISMA, the HIPAA.
Yeah,
the health
we
stuff.
have a number of different regimes, and also
we have gaps there.
We do have some differences. It's a mix of public and private for utilities. Water tends to be more of a public authority in a town or county level, Electricity, however, tends to be a lot of private enterprise. So it's a mix of those things. What we did in the US, where it made sense, is per critical infrastructure vertical, we try to encourage the creation of information sharing and analysis centers, ISACs. Basically self-help organizations for each of those industry verticals so that they can provide some amount of self-help. They also become a way of scaling the information out, because sometimes you can't reach and touch every element of a given sector. You may not know all of the players in that sector at all times, but that industry association or group ideally does know all of their members, and they know how to reach them. So if you distribute information out, they can get it out to all the rest. That definitely helped us to scale out better and start to get industry-specific guidance and help to them to learn what they needed to do better in their sector. And
We have a question from Cal in the front, then we'll move back here.
Okay.
So touching on some of the earlier discussion, there are millions of computers out there owned by homeowners, individual citizens and everything, many of which may be compromised acting in a botnet. What is the role, or is there a role for the CERT working with these individuals or with their ISPs and everything to really address those issues and help eliminate the botnets and everything that are affecting the rest of our infrastructure?
I have a question, Cal. Do we put police officers on every door and every firefighter on every door?
No.
Then
But they
that-
do come when there's an indication of something
But that's not
going wrong.
true. That's kind of the point that I'm trying to get. We can't put the government on the hook for absolutely everything. If you have a small fender bender, the police don't show up. And I'm not saying this facetiously. I'm just saying people can't expect a national CERT to solve every single problem. I give the analogy that we do not put a firefighter and a police officer on every single doorstep because we simply can't. We don't try to go to that level. We turn around and say, you need to be somewhat proactive on it. I think doing public policy to go, your machine could be doing part of it, but to help every individual Canadian, that's saying the same as we're going to have somebody standing there protecting because they've had a little grease fire in their kitchen.
So
Like, we
I'm
can't.
not advocating that they help every individual. I'm asking what their role would be in dealing with these types of incidents, whether it's working with the ISPs to make sure that they help the individuals, not just cut them off the network because they're a botnet, and that's the end of it, and they don't know why they were cut off their networks.
So maybe I'll just jump in really quick. Is there a role? Absolutely. And national certs have been playing that role for many years. And to the data question or the data point that was made earlier about getting information, not being an enterprise cert, that's the kind of information that certs get on a regular basis globally. And what certs do with that is they carve it up and they send it to the organization that happens to own the IP space. And in many cases, that is a home user. The challenge is, how do you explain to my mother, who calls me at least once a week and says, I got another call from CRA, or, well, maybe not anymore, or I got this. So there is a bit of a gap there in terms of fully addressing those issues. But national certs absolutely play a role there. They also play a role in, and I think it's incumbent upon us as national cert people, is to inform the policymakers, the communications folks that aren't technical about the issues that we're seeing so that they can develop user-level guidance, something that's consumable by the general public about these types of issues, about not clicking on a link on an unsolicited link, email, about making sure that their computer is connected to the update ecosystem that exists. Those are the two primary roles we've tried to play at CSIRC and will continue to play throughout at the Cyber Center, at least in my view.
Yeah, so I've given a lot of thought to that when I was in National CERT and receiving like the 20,000 Canadian IP address infected every day, half of them being configure. So we know that, and so what's the role? So the solution to that, so some US ISPs have done some amazing job, right? Wall garden, so at scale, on thousands and thousands of customers, so essentially gets redirected. You go to browse from home, and then you get redirected temporarily to a site that tells you, by the way, you're owned, and here's the site, here's the advice from your national CERT Now, the question is, how does that differ from, fake AV? There's a bit of, but if it's implemented at the telco level, the wall garden, then I think there's a scalable way of notifying people and giving them ways of cleaning themselves and potentially mitigating it this way, so at scale. So there's technical challenges in there, obviously, but I think there's a lot of potential there. And having that trust relationship between the telco, the service provider, that is, and the national cert as the authority supporting it. So we did something like that with DNS Changer, with CIRA, with .ca a couple of years ago, where we provided a page for people to test their DNS, and if they were infected, then we're telling them how to go and mitigate themselves. So I think there's
And I should mention, this is how Luke became my boss, right? The first time, because he said the exact same thing you did, Cal. Why don't you guys, as ISPs, try and do more about this? When Luke kindly goes, there's technical issues. I know the ISPs that have put this in, they designed it from the beginning. It is significantly harder to do that mitigation than one would think. And when Luke said, oh, you should do this, I'm like, fantastic, come over, be my boss, show me how it's done. Do you want to talk now about the technical, how hard it is?
We have time for one last question.
All right.
No way you can expect any homeowner who doesn't have any skills or knowledge, or even knowledge that they're infected or that they're compromised and acting as a botnet, to do anything about it. So that's why I was wondering what kind of role, the CERTs, the ISPs and everything, really in identifying that they're infected, that they have an issue or something? Because the user won't get that.
Yeah, usually it's going to come in the form of large-scale botnet takedowns, where some researchers and others have found that the long list of compromised systems, get it out to the appropriate national cert that oversees that country. They then break it up into the smaller chunks, get it to the right ISP, and then on the D-Day, when the disconnect is going to happen, have also coordinated not just with the local or the ISPs in that country, but the antivirus providers to provide a one-off scanner that's going to clean that particular thing. Now, when it comes to the various random infections and other things, when you have a breakdown in your car, we don't expect you to know how to fix it. We expect that you're going to take it to the mechanic down the road and pay for your own repairs as needed. If your computer has a breakdown, sometimes that's going to be the same thing. There are local resources for do it. People just don't necessarily like to pay or recognize that they have a responsibility in it themselves.
Thank you, Chris. I want to move to just one last question
Absolutely.
back here.
I'm glad that the topic of cloud came up, because more and more we're finding our data is transiting and being stored outside of one country's borders. Any comments from the panel as to the current state of international cooperation amongst national certs? I know we have FIRST and all. And how better to work between national certs that might be at different capability and different maturity levels?
Who wants to take this one?
All right. So I'll address the kind of the national cert angle to your question, if that's okay. So national certs meet face-to-face annually, not only through FIRST, through other mechanisms. There are regional associations as well, whether it be AP Cert, whether it be other regional cert organizations that bring certs together to discuss these issues, to discuss better ways of sharing information amongst themselves, to address cloud issues amongst others, and strategies to how to deal with cloud and secure the cloud. This happens and has been going on for quite some time. Recognizing, and to your point, is that the level of maturity and capability across a lot of these certs varies extensively. There are a number of leaders in this space that are trying to, or investing a lot in capacity building for some of these certs. The Australians, in particular, along with the Kiwis, are investing quite a significant amount of resources towards building Asia-Pacific certs within the region so that they can bring up their game, so that they can have a bit more of an intelligent discussion with them about these larger scale issues. That's kind of where I see things going in the cert space on that.
You actually, you hit exactly where I was going to go. The regional certs, which are a conglomeration of all of the national level certs in a given region. AP Cert, OIC Cert, the Organization for Islamic Cooperation, and others, they play a role in kind of helping do capacity building for the individual national level certs.
Yeah, I'll contribute just 1 second. It's very impressive the number of connections that you can get in a given country. For example, I had to do a takedown of Flashback a couple of years ago, working in a small group of security professionals there, and I was in charge of sinkholing out of the DGA the .kz. That's Kazakhstan. Well, so you think I could turn to the Kazakhstan cert and ask them to sinkhole those domains, and there was not a point of contact for the Kazakhstan cert. But the .kz TLD relationship in the DNS community, we did have that contact. And so there's ramification between ISPs, and sometimes I don't have the ISP contact for Kazakhstan, but I have the upstream with BGP contact. And maybe they're all going through, I don't know, a buddy that, like Cox Communication or whatever. So then you put pressure from that side. So it's a multiple angle perspective, and the community is large enough, there's enough of a critical mass there that you can actually reach and put pressure at the right place through those trust relationship. So hence the importance of joining those communities.
Thank you very much. And on that note, we're out of time. So Chris, Luke, Pat, Sasha, thank you very much.